Hello and welcome to the Let's Talk Azure podcast with your host Sam Foote.
And Alan Armstrong.
If you're new here, we're a pair of Azure and Office 365 focused IT security professionals. Each episode, we talk about a specific topic in the space. This week, it's episode 14 of season 2. We're going to talk around Microsoft's threat vulnerability management and how it can reduce your risk of compromise. Hey Alan, how are you doing?
Hey Sam, I'm doing okay. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad, not too bad. Soon it'll be Ignite. Are you excited for your trip away?
Yep, definitely excited. Just all the prep to go over after COVID and things like that.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, should be
Cool.
fun.
Yeah, it should be amazing. Should be amazing. Right. Okay. So yeah, this week we're going to have a chat around Microsoft Threat Vulnerability Management. Alan is going to take on the role of the expert. He's got a lot of experience in this space, so it'll be interesting to see what we get out of him today. So should we jump straight in, Alan? You ready to go?
Yeah, sure. No pressure for me then.
So what is Microsoft's Threat Vulnerability Management?
So Microsoft's Threat Vulnerability Management (TVM) has been part of Microsoft Defender for Endpoint (MDE) um, for quite some time now. So it kind of came in as they started to enhance um, Defender for Endpoint. Coming from legacy Defender, kind of just AV kind of stuff, and then enhancing it. So it kind of started there. It's it's able to highlight vulnerabilities within your devices, and then you can get in effect a list of what your risk in effect from your endpoints and things like that. It was mainly originally designed only for Windows because it being first party, sorry, not third party. Um, and now it's moved to other operating systems as Defender for Endpoint has supported other operating systems.
Okay, so effectively, we're actually using the MDE agent to grab this information from the device, and that's how we're getting such enriched information around, say, the software inventory that's on there and associated issues that they may have.
Yeah, for the onboarded device into MD, yes, you're able to see the software inventory and then any CVEs against that software or operating system. And sometimes, depending on the platform, it could also be against hardware as well. So if you think about um, Android mainly, I guess, where you can see the operating system, the different versions or the different security patching for those and their levels, and sometimes there is some risk in, I guess, some CVEs in some of the hardware I've seen. So
Okay, great. And how does it help me to identify risk in my environment?
we kind of talked about it. It is using the Microsoft Defender for Endpoint (MDE's) agent when it's activated or onboarded into the portal. And in effect, like I said, or like we said, it's scanning those devices. So it works on the main the operating systems out there now, including Linux now, which is a recent add. But yeah, it's just using that onboarding agent, so it's relatively simple to start getting that information without in effect you automatically get it, providing you got the licensing for it, which we'll talk about later.
Okay, so is it just onboarded devices that it covers? Is there any other areas? Can you just take us through what the sort of coverage is?
Yeah, sure. So I'll talk about the ones that the onboarded devices. That is, Android, iOS, iPad OS, Linux, Mac OS, and Windows. So relatively easy to cover those because it's all they're all supported. Um, the other bits is network devices. So you can run a SNMP authenticated communication with them with a scanner that can then go and pull the base information like the device's name and the operating system version, which then you see in the portal, and then it will tell you if there is any newer versions or any CVEs within that operating system for that switch, firewall, etc. And with the network devices, you can do that for um, any network device. There's only it just might not get all the vulnerability information because it's Microsoft are going on the basis that they've done the main ones like Cisco, Palo Alto's, and there's a few others, probably HP, I think it is, and I think there's another one, but I can't remember it off the top of my head. But as they see other network devices, they will decide to put the information in there. So it's more get everything in there. It may not work straight away, but at some point, Microsoft will improve that functionality. Um, and then the other part to it is that you can get it for enterprise IoT devices. So that is based on the MDE agents or the onboarded devices scanning the network, or there being a enterprise IoT scanner. I mean, we could talk about this part of this, in an episode, couldn't we, Sam? Because we've been looking at it recently. But in essence, you can collect the information about your unmanaged devices in effect, and then depending on the information that comes back from them, you can potentially get some vulnerability information about them.
Okay, so we're not just talking about sort of like, I'll call it like the main like high level operating systems, Mac, Windows, Linux, Android, iOS, iPadOS. Um, it's also reaching out to your, I'll call them like manage, well, your network, your enterprise network kit, from SNMP, or anything I suppose that supports an SNMP,
Yeah,
on the network, right? Because that's like a standardized protocol for exchange of information, right? And then you're also potentially delving into completely unmanaged devices. I'm assuming like corporate enterprise devices. I'm thinking printers, smart TVs, boardroom casting devices, Teams, Polycoms, those things of the world, right? There are enterprise IoT assets which just, aren't, may not be centrally managed through some sort of, interface, if that makes sense.
yeah, absolutely. So it's helping you discover them in the first instance, but also, yes, showing that understanding the risk in your environment. So whether you can or can't upgrade them, because there may not be a patch to fix something that's on them that maybe have been identified, but at least you can understand the risk and decide about mitigations if needed.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And I think, well, we talk about this a lot, and I think I've said these exact words multiple times on this podcast. Is that you have to understand what is in your environment before you can act upon it. Right? Discovery is a very important part of your process. So these sorts of technologies that that you might be licensed for. We'll talk about licensing later. That you might be licensed for, and you can really get enriched sort of discovered data around your estate, right? Where maybe you've got an Excel spreadsheet of all your smart devices that you've got in your office, right? And that's what you look up to check against, Whereas this is collecting things once it's configured in an automated fashion, right? So it is very, very powerful from that perspective.
Yeah, definitely.
So how does it help me? So I've identified I've identified my I call them catalog of software vulnerabilities across lots of different devices. Can it then does it do more than that? Does it help me to remediate? Like what's the next stage? As I think about like actioning these devices.
So what comes out of it in effect is remediation steps or recommendations. So probably stepping back a little bit, that I've probably missed from the top part or what we just talked about, is that in effect you get a exposure score. So how exposed are you from 0 to 100, and then there's X percent means this much exposure kind of thing, and you can engage how much, and that's based on the vulnerability it's found, how many you've got, things like that.
Are we sort of seeing like sorry to interrupt you, Alan, but are we for that severity we're sort of seeing sort of like a weighted rank between number of vulnerabilities found versus say their CVE like score, if that makes sense. Some sort of like is that how we should think about it? Like how bad they are and the frequency of bad vulnerabilities that we found.
Yeah, exactly. It's a combination of both. It then gives you in effect the what the portal, the MDE portal, or that it's not in MDE anymore. It's the Microsoft 365 Defender portal now sees, um, as your overall score kind of thing against that. Um, but that also includes that is just, in fact, that is just vulnerabilities at that point. So there's another part to it, is that if you've got, including unmanaged devices, they give you configuration recommendations as well. So there may be some operating system changes they recommend you do to secure it better, as well as sometimes printers and switches and things like that. Because it might say disable the SNMP version 1 and 2, the unsecure, less secure ones, and use version 3, that sort of stuff. So you can get an idea if there's improvements to your environment without not actually being vulnerabilities. So that's sort of part of the recommendations you can get, and you can look at it by device. So you can see a device that may be high exposure level and see all the potential changes you need to do or software updates. Um, and or you can see a list of them, and it will rank, in effect, rank it about which one will give you the next score increase in effect. So it'll help you prioritize in effect which one will improve your or reduce your exposure level. Um, so going alongside that, when you get one of these, you can create a remediation task. Now, initially, this is just saying that you want to remediate by X time, and in effect, you can track that progress. So it goes into a different part of a remediation task, and you can see that you've got 30 devices out of 50 exposed to this vulnerability. And then you can see it as they get patched, that number go up, so you can confirm that it is being patched. The other sort of part to it is that you can create a task into Endpoint Manager, so that if you've got two teams, one that's looking after the deployment of the software and the management of the devices, and then you've got the security team, they can say, well, Chrome needs updating, so I'm going to create a remediation task and tick a box to say I want to create a task in Endpoint Manager. So that will go over to there, and then the desktop team or the server team can then look at that task. It tells them how to create it, in effect, what they need to do.
Okay, so we're really layering on like a management process to actually tracking these remediations and their impact over time, right? Not just and it's giving you that. If you're unsure about the remediation steps, you're also going to get guidance from Microsoft in terms of what they would recommend, the steps that you take, right? And give you good guidance there.
Yeah, so yeah, with software, it's kind of obviously you need to upgrade to the latest one, but with like the configurations, it will tell you how to do it in group policy or how to do it in Endpoint Manager, so that it's easy to just in effect build it and then deploy it, and then you're sorted.
Okay, yeah, that sounds really powerful. To be fair, it sounds like there's a real sort of like full end-to-end life cycle there. That are built in. Especially in these areas. It's great. Um, so should we talk about licensing and costs? Because well, I don't know. Let's see how complicated it is. So can you give us a lowdown of how you license it?
Yeah, sure. So this isn't as complicated as uh, Purview Information Protection. I think that was quite crazy when we did that
Yeah.
one. Still a little bit, but not too bad. So um, this is all part of Defender for Endpoint Plan 2. So not the Plan 1. That's just standard sort of AV. So I think it's not the EDR perspective of it. So that's included in the Plan 2. So that's the lowest sort of layer you can go to if you want to buy that individually. Same thing for Windows, Defender for Server via Defender for Cloud now. You can get via Windows Enterprise E5. And then you go up to the next tier, which is Microsoft 365 E5 security add-on to M365 E3, and then M365 E5. So that is kind of the standard levels to get this. So it's really about Defender for Endpoints capability. But what Microsoft have done recently, I think it may be in the last 6 months, maybe even to a year now. I can't remember when it came out. They brought in this new add-on and standalone SKU called Microsoft Defender Vulnerability Management Add-on and Vulnerability Management Standalone. So they give you some extra features on top of the standard TVM side of things. So, and it might mean that also you don't have to have EDR, Defender for Endpoint Plan 2 to get this vulnerability scanning, which is quite cool as well. If you've got another EDR solution currently in place.
Okay. Okay, so there are a few different ways to gain access to this, and so just going back to the P1, the Defender for Endpoint P1, P2, is this the main benefit that you're getting from P2 uplift over P1, or
No.
is there anything else? Because this must be, if I'm making that decision to jump from P1 to P2, for instance, what this isn't the only part of that, right? There is more to it than that. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the plan two is the EDR part as well as the threat vulnerability management. So that is automated response to threats, machine learning on that, detecting threats on a device. So it's all that sort of that side of things. Next gen file, next gen antivirus and things like that. So it's bringing all that into it as well. Being able to isolate a device um, from anywhere, just so that it can still talk to the defender for endpoint, but is locked down. So if you've got ransomware, it can stop sending, um, can stop spreading, and the things like the live response, where you can in effect remote the machine from the portal,
Okay.
from a command line and stuff. So
Okay, that makes
there's a
sense.
lot
Yeah,
more.
yeah. So if you don't need that capability, that is why the new SKUs from the Defender for Vulnerability Management will help when you're guiding a customer through that. Right? They don't have to take on full P2. They can go the Defender for Vulnerability Management like option, if that makes sense, from a from P1, if that makes sense.
Yeah, the standalone would be for that one. The add-on is for the P2 and E5 to enhance those even more from that perspective.
Got it. Right. Okay. Great. So yeah, so do you want to like just chat around that new Defender for Vulnerability Management add-on? And because isn't it in preview at the moment? It's like here, kind of here on its way.
Yeah, so it is in preview, and in all fairness, I've not had full exposure to testing it. But yes, so it is in preview. Wouldn't surprise me if it got GA'd at Ignite. It's been out for quite some time now, so it wouldn't surprise me next week. I guess. Um, but yeah, so what does it bring? So it allows you to do, in effect, security baselines, so that if maybe you're going against a industry standard, you might be able to baseline your devices against it. So the example they give is they do CIS. So you'll be able to benchmark a device against and its configuration against CIS, which I think is quite powerful if you're trying to meet that part alongside. We've talked about CIS in the cloud and things like that. This is now bring it to your endpoints.
Yeah, because right, forgive my naivety because I'm not the expert in this area, but I'm going to just do a bit of a comparison between like CIS benchmarking on the cloud, like Defender for Cloud, that sort of thing, and policy. That's quite like mature now. It's got great coverage, right? So if I'm an organization, I don't have this baselining capability, and I do align myself to say CIS, because from what I understand from configuring, say Windows endpoints, there are so many different configuration options, right? Is this basically like helping me to understand how I can configure these machines to actually be compliant against like this overarching framework that my organization follows? Is that effectively what we're saying here? Like how we should configure it, or is it more from is it more from software inventory and threat vulnerability like standpoint, if that makes sense?
No, so I need to dive into it a bit more, but I believe it is based on the configuration of the device. So
Fine.
you're
Okay.
right, you
Right.
can do that, and potentially out there is group policy that will say, this is what you need to configure for CIS, sort of thing, and then you can deploy it and or tweak it based on your requirements. Because as we've always said, there's you may not be able to hit everything in a CIS, but as long as you can document or uh, dictate dictate why why you've made that decision to not enable it,
Yeah,
then when you go to those audits, you can say, well, we wanted to do this, but our software really doesn't support turning off Java, that sort of
yeah,
stuff, and this is the mitigations, blah blah blah.
yeah.
But
Well,
yeah, so this,
yeah, yeah. Well, we also know that full compliance with a regulatory like framework like CIS is generally a journey for a customer. It's
yes,
not necessarily like a hey, we're gonna like remediate everything, like overnight, if that makes sense. So I'm guessing this is gonna give us a way to benchmark what our current configuration looks like, and then um, give us the ability to create a remediation plan that works like with our organization, right? To get us to that point. Let's benchmark where we are, and let's then use that as like a north star to get us to where we want to be, right? And how we're going to go through that process.
yeah, well, like I said, you can potentially, actually do the deployment from other methods, but what this is doing is actually giving you validation that you've configured it as well. Is that
Right. Yes.
also,
Exactly. Yeah.
whilst in Intune maybe it just says yes, it was deployed, but this is confirming that again to say actually it is confirmed, it is deployed, sort of thing. So
Yeah. It feels
it
like
just
Defender for Cloud for endpoints, right? That's
yeah.
what. Yeah. Yeah.
God,
Yeah.
don't
I
make
get
that
that. Yeah.
don't make that a product. Defender for Cloud for endpoints. Jeez. Uh,
Well, we could. That's another product name and another set of acronyms that we could, yeah, quite easily forget. Okay, but I kind of get. That's why I compared it to like Defender for Cloud, because it's effectively doing a similar sort of thing, right? Baselining your environment against. In this scenario, it's not like cloud resources, but it is actually endpoints, right? Where I assume there's less maturity of, because there's, I don't know. I just assume that the vast majority of endpoints are not configured or aligned to a framework or standard, or if that's all done manually at the moment, I would assume.
yeah, like I said, that sometimes you do get some like Microsoft security baselines. You can get them in Endpoint Manager. You could get them as group policy. I used to use them. What I say, I used to use them in my previous life. I used them to build for the organization I was, and then we would make changes because it would break stuff, and then document it and things like that. That's why I kind of went down that
Yep.
sort of discussion. So, but yeah. So other bits you get is that say you have a vulnerable application um, on a managed device, you can block that application from running. So if there is something really bad that you don't want to do until it's patched, then you can block it, which I think is very powerful because that is in effect reducing your risk completely. That application now can't run. It may be like I guess it could be an old version of Visual Studio, Git, something that maybe someone uses once in a while and it's there and they can't use it until they patch it. I think that's quite powerful there.
Okay. Yeah. So you're also sort of being you're sort of enabling sort of a level of like access control around specific applications, dependent on maybe their like level of vulnerability, if that makes sense, right? Like let's say we, like you use the example, well, we use your example of like, you know there's a 0-day vulnerability that is released for, let's say, some version of Git. You identify it in your estate, and then you can instantly block those apps straight away whilst you get round to remediating, right? And doing that. So once, because you've got the discovery and you've got the control, then you can kick in and actually use those, as a defensive measure, right, in those scenarios.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's a great sort of feature there because in some form you wouldn't want to necessarily do all vulnerabilities because the device may stop working. You might break business, but if there is a high risk one or a high profile one that's happening, then absolutely you can go in and nuke it, and no one can use it until it's patched, until it's
When
off the next version.
do you know what like platform and operating system is supported for that? Is it just Windows, do you think?
I so I don't know. It will definitely be Windows, as you can believe, think that it's going to be first party, but I wouldn't, thinking about the technology itself, MDE on those other things. I think they would be able to block it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah,
It's
well, I
not it's
definitely
not
know
something
from a
new.
Mac perspective, yeah, that would definitely be able to. I assume that would be able to do it. Like you say, if it can't out of the box at the moment, then it's probably only going to be a matter of time because we've seen that with a lot of things around MDE and Intune is just like they're just expanding into multiple platforms now, aren't they? It's like they're done with Windows, and they're not done with Windows, but they're like completed Windows, done that, got the badge. Let's move on and let's get all of our software, well, our software and our platforms on every single operating system and platform that we possibly can. Right? It's reasonable to do.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I would assume the assumption is that it would work on all platforms that they're currently covering, but you're right. It may be that they've not tested it because it's preview. Maybe it is just Windows for now, and they're just confirming the other operating systems because they don't want to break anything. So,
Yeah. Cool.
and then really the only other thing now is that you can do additional assessments on certificates and plugins on at least Windows. I don't know about the other operating systems, but definitely Windows. So within Edge and Chrome, I don't know about the other browsers. I would have to double check that. But in effect, you can see what's users are have got installed if you haven't got a policy to stop them, and then you can see assess how good or bad they are. Same with certificates. Is there a rogue certificate there? Who knows? Or it's been compromised that you know about, so you can see where your risk is.
Yeah, that's really powerful because browser plugins I think have more focus nowadays anyway, right? Because we that they're so easy to install and they're so accessible, right?
Yeah.
But like yeah, like you say, like certificate tracking, like are the right number of certificates on that machine? Are they all validated? Are they all like secure? If that makes sense. So it's interesting where they're like extending their reach, if that makes sense, onto the device. They're tracking and assessing different types of objects that IT professionals like might be tracking. Maybe they're tracking it manually. Maybe I don't know how they would be doing that at the moment, right? Maybe they've got some specific other tooling to do that. But that seems like quite a good thing to actually have visibility of, right? And reassurance that you've actually got a tool there in place to understand those different like I'll call them data stores, like applications
Mm.
and things, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, the plugins can be, how do you remediate against a plugin? How do you know that people have got it installed? Who's got it installed? There's no inventory. There are tools to do it. You're right, but out of the box, you got to buy this add-on to get it. But generally, baked in there is, because you don't have to install anything. Once you've got that license, it starts doing it. It's it's as simple as
Yeah, and
that.
I kind of think as well is the like the sort of the shadow IT element of it as well,
Mm,
because like if you think let's say you don't have a policy in place to block people installing like particularly anything that they want, right? That might not be the case for all of your users in your estate, right? You might have some that have got more privileged access and things like that. But like, I'm just thinking like my developer brain going. It's like I've got Firefox installed that I sometimes use for development, and I've got a plugin installed in that, which I might not even open the browser once every 6 months or something like that. So the
mm.
browser itself might be out of date. And then there's also this micro ecosystem of like plugins and extensions inside of that. I'm not saying that I use Firefox as just a random example. I'm not saying that like their ecosystem is terrible, but it might not even be from a malicious like it's probably very rarely from a malicious standpoint or anything like that. It's usually like a function of time. I've had this build of Firefox installed for 6 months. I haven't opened it in 6 months, and for some reason I've got X, Y, and Z extensions that I needed 6 months ago that I haven't even looked at again. They've now got vulnerabilities in them, and those systems might not even being checked by IT at the moment, right? So when you've got these automated agents just like looking at everything, your spies on these machines like 24/7, then from a lazy automation perspective, that sounds great to me. I don't have to go and like check anything or track anything. I utilize this. I pay my fee, and I've got peace of mind that these things are being checked, 24/7, right? Inside of my estate.
And actually, you mentioned something that we didn't really talk about for the standard stuff is that shadow IT with software in that Defender for Endpoint is tracking some of that, and that you're right. If you've got those users that, or even on servers where someone's installed Chrome because they wanted to go and download something because Edge and IE at the time was disabled, you know, how do you know it's on there? And there's a server with production software sat next to a vulnerable browser that someone goes clicks on it and puts a link in. I mean, they're reduced risk servers because they're not doing the day-to-day stuff, but there's still potential there. So yeah.
Yeah, I think you're just constantly. I assume, and I've not been in like the corporate IT side, but I assume that software inventory is kind of like a recurring battle that you have to go through like continuously, right? Because everything is being updated, like Zoom's being updated 3 times a week, or whatever the build frequencies are, right? And you're constantly trying to keep up with CVEs, and dependent on how like diverse your software inventory is, you effectively open yourself up to much more management and oversight, if that makes sense, right? So yeah, I'm guessing it can be very complicated, especially when you've got a lot of users and managing that, right?
Yeah, and I think that's another feature of this that I didn't write down in our notes, but that it also does prioritized fully, in effect prioritized remediation tasks. With this, it adds more to it than what I was saying about TVM. Is I think it actually goes right. You really need to sort this out first in this order, because you're right. You're always having that battle, and you need to prioritize. And there's always something more, more important to do. So yeah,
I
so
think I think
definitely.
we've spoken about this before, because like TVM is quite a I don't know. It's not one of those real time response elements, is it? Right? Because it's not like an emerging like live threat, if that makes sense, right? Because I can assume that like if you weren't to keep up with TVM, then theoretically, you know, inside your organization, you're just continuously increasing your attack surface of
Yes.
known like zero known vulnerabilities, right? So if you don't keep on top of it, when you do when you get breached, it makes lateral movement inside of your organization a lot more simplistic potentially, right? Because there's known exploits to move and to work around, right? But because it isn't real time, and it's kind of like one of those, oh yeah, we'll get to it, right? Having a prioritized list of tasks kind of makes it as easy as possible for people to actually like action and do, right? Because it's like uh you know I'll do all my highs, right? I'll get my highs done, like I'll jump on my highs within 3 days, or whatever it is, like some big new log4j, I'm going to jump on that like yesterday. And then you can start to prioritize that, because we know that these teams have limited resources. They don't have unlimited time to sit there and do everything that they're being asked to, right? So that seems really powerful to me.
Yeah, and I keep thinking of things that we need to talk about, but there's another piece to this that say there's been a global attack. These compromises we hear about. I mean, we're talking about WannaCry that was like God 3-4 years ago now, and it seems so long ago. And Cozy Bear, things like that. Microsoft do in effect a report of what happened there. So when one of these attacks become public and they can share their research in effect, you get this report and it says this is how they attacked. This is all this is what happened basically, and then it goes, here's your environment, and these are the devices that are mitigated or exposed or are currently being attacked with this exploit. So you can see straight away, one, if you're being compromised that way, which obviously Defender for Endpoint is going to be lighting up like a Christmas tree anyway, hopefully.
Yeah.
um,
Some
and
hopefully somebody's looking out and will
yeah,
get those alerts.
exactly. Um, And then you can also see how many devices are exposed to that or that method of compromise or
Yeah,
that exploit. So you can then see, well, okay, now I know I need to fix these 10 devices because they've not been patched in Edge or Chrome or the operating system. So there's that part to it as well, that it's not just the day-to-day stuff. It's right now, this is a situation, this is an attack that's happened. This is how exposed you are to that attack. And you can see
yeah,
that pretty much as that is announced, sort of thing. So when
yeah,
everyone's rushing around trying to work out if they're being compromised, checking the firewalls and all that sort of stuff, they go, okay, what's our devices saying?
yeah. And I assume if you've got that level of context, right, to those scenarios, you can then effectively prioritize based on the attack chain, right? Like where you know maybe like an onion, you go for your outer skin and then you go inwards, if that makes sense, to prioritize your remediation, right? So yeah, so you are getting like the experience of like Microsoft's security teams, and also it's not just the, I suppose, what I feel you're saying is that you're not just getting the actual technology, you're also getting the constant proactive, threat hunting that Microsoft is providing to you, and sort of essentially giving you all the answers on a plate, right? Like, here's what's happening now. This is what we think you should focus on right now. Um, and then do that, and giving you those recommendations. Do that now, and then secure yourself in the best way possible. So when your CISO, like your head of IT or whoever does that in your organization, taps on your shoulder and goes, that log4j, how bad are we, and you're like, we did that this morning when we like, do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, had that remediated, like, let's move on. It's just, it's part of it because your inventory, right? Because that was the big thing about like log4j is loads of people didn't know their inventory. So like, how do they know what what log4j is part of? It's like, have we got any Java? Because anything that's Java could have log4j. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
it's like, it was kind of that really exposed, like, from my experience, that really exposed people's immaturity in terms of like software inventory, right? I mean, that was more like kind of developer focused anyway. It wasn't like it was a library as part of like, so that takes it even further than this. I mean, there are developer tools for like what I would call TVM, like sync and things like that, which allows you to, and Microsoft has got some tooling around that in terms of containers and different bits and bobs, right? Um, so that is a slightly different thing, but I think that really highlighted the same problem, right? Maybe this is a bit higher level, maybe this is a bit easier to see, but yeah, it is still scary when those things happen, right? Especially when you've got to answer to you know um, non-technical stakeholders, let's say. Yeah, what's going on.
Yes.
Cool, all right.
So
And yeah, anything else, Alan, that you want to cover, or anything you think we've missed?
so I don't. Well, I've probably missed something because it's like, again, it's like another beast. I keep talking
Yeah.
about all these big products, and you can imagine me trying to keep up with these things when they change. So I probably missed something. So I apologies for that. But one thing I do want to mention is that there are APIs for Defender for Endpoint or Microsoft 365 Defender, and you can pull this data out. Like, what devices are exposed, what's your thing. So it's not just I have to go into the portal, I have to use it, I have to do that. I can maybe build some logic apps to query that data and maybe give me some other information, or maybe do some other things with it. Maybe if I was, I mean, we're talking, maybe we could build something to go and notify the teams they need to go and do something, rather than it just be, you can get notification within Defender for Endpoint for vulnerabilities. You can get an email notification. You could potentially create custom detectors and things like that, but at the same time, you can also build some logic, or I say logic because I'm talking about logic apps, but you could build some automation um, to read that information and maybe do something with it.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. Like, well, MDE as a product, in terms of how extensible it is via its APIs, I would say is really mature, right? We talk about this a lot in terms of, we call them gap fillers, right? Where Microsoft, maybe haven't, given us the what we particularly need. Maybe a customer's asked us some specific information, we have to pull that into a logic app or surface it in some sort of way in Power BI, whatever like scenario that is. Um, but I do think it's really great of them to make it so open as it is, right? Because
Mm.
like you say, it is, I would say, trivial to and relatively well. I'd say well documented. I'm not even going to say relatively. Well, it's well documented on how you can get this information out, right? And yeah, you can make the argument that it should have been in there in the first place, but a second best is just access to all the data anyway, right? So that's and we've seen how powerful that is even from the TVM side, right? There's really a huge amount of rich data there that you can pull, mash into whatever format you want to, and um, and export it however you see fit.
Yeah, well, it's bringing it into your ticketing system, isn't it? As a task or a change and things like that. You can automate that to put it in as an instant, and then you can go through that standard, business process at least. Even something as simple as that. To say, there's these 10 devices that need updating, and because you're not using Endpoint Manager, you might be using Config Manager, you might be using something else to do that. You know,
Yeah, exactly.
it's
Yeah,
opening up to
yeah.
you can build
And
anything.
those automations are usually generally quite simple as well, right? It's just
Yeah.
like repackaging of the data or sending it to a different system. So yeah, completely right. Okay, so shall I just go through a little bit of reflection, and I'll just I'll sort of mirror back to you what I think you've explained to me. Let's fingers crossed. So we get great information and discovery around our exposure levels. We're looking at our software inventory across loads of different types of devices, including well, I'll say corporate network devices and completely unmanaged enterprise IoT devices as well, and understanding as much as we can the software that's in our estate and our exposure to vulnerabilities from that. It's not also going to just give me discovery; it's also going to show me how to remediate those devices, which is well the second half of the battle, isn't it? Right? It's all well good knowing what the problem is, but how can we, and maybe sometimes we can't know everything. We don't profess to know everything. Sometimes it's great to have somebody else give us some guidance in terms of like how they would approach a situation as well. So that's very welcome. It seems like with the new Defender for vulnerability management add-ons, there's a lot of flexibility in terms of licensing. You can either bump up to a P2. Obviously, you can go for your E5s because, yep, that's all singing, all dancing. But I think what it feels like to me is Microsoft have also seen that people have their own EDR or different EDR solutions, right? So there's flexibility in terms of how you license it, right? Which is really really great. Um, and the the I think the last big thing as well is this new. Shall I call it missing piece of threat vulnerability, which is the new like Defender offering, which allows you to do more in-depth analysis, do assessments and baselining against your against your environment, and the blocking of vulnerable apps as well. From on a per app perspective, that seems really powerful from my perspective. Anything I've missed there, Alan, or any other really key like points that you want to get across?
No, I think that's probably it. I was thinking about something as you were talking, but I've lost it. So
Okay, well,
it's
it's
fine.
gone forever
It can't be. Yeah, it can't be that important. So,
then.
um,
Okay, great. What's our next episode, Alan?
well, I don't know, Sam. What is our next episode?
We're going to be talking around Azure Sphere. So if you are um, a lover of IoT devices, Azure Sphere approaches IoT devices in I would say a different way to traditional IoT devices. So yeah, we're gonna. I've effectively got myself an Azure Sphere development kit. I've been playing around with it. Definitely not an expert in it whatsoever, but I'm going to try and give you a high level overview about what you can do with the platform and the sort of benefits that it can bring to your organization. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do consider subscribing if you'd like to listen to more of this sort of content in the future. We have many, many more topics that we'd like to cover, and your listens and your support is what will continue to fuel the podcast going forward.
Season 14, Sam, or episode 14, I should say. So, yeah, so good to get here. Um,
Yeah, exactly.
so, you know, we've got the ability to for you to give us some feedback. Did you enjoy this episode? Do you disagree with my thoughts, or did I miss something, or get something completely wrong? It's entirely possible.
I
Um,
disagree.
yeah, thanks. Uh, yes, in the show notes there is a link that you can use that will take you to a page where you can provide us some feedback, good or bad, and we can use that to help with the show.
Excellent. Thanks very much for your insights, Alan, and we'll catch you all on the next one.
Yep. Thanks everyone for listening. Speak to you soon. Bye.